This call is now being recorded.
Um, which is actually neglected by the post-structuralist. And according to the post-structuralism, a reader is the former of ideas. Like, a reader is independent to assume as many truths as he wants by reading a text.
Okay, and what do you mean by structure of the text? What
The
is
pattern.
structuralism about structure of the text at all? So what do you mean by structure?
Sir, it includes various things like the pattern and the means it is the genre and the things which are included in.
Okay. Okay, so what Divya seems to be suggesting is that the post-structuralist developments later focused on reader as the creator of meaning, and structuralism was more about structure of literary texts, which the post-structuralists did not pay much attention to. Now, this is not a very accurate uh, version of what it is, right? But that doesn't mean that whatever she said is completely incorrect. There is a point to which what she is saying, because the difference between structuralism and post-structuralism seems to be quite complex one. It's not such an easy thing to discuss. So what we are going to do in this semester, we are going to take a closer look and maybe have a more detailed discussion on the idea of structuralism, formalism, and post-structuralism in your next semester. Though we will be touching upon post-structuralism even in this semester, right? Uh, However, my mode of working, and those who have done their undergrad program with me are aware of this, but those who have joined later, is that in classroom, I don't ask questions to find out or point out that you are inadequate, right? My intention behind asking questions is not to put you down, but make you think and articulate. And given the fact that there is no absolute right question and right answer, all all the efforts that you put in to think and articulate will help you in your own intellectual development as well as in your expression and articulation, which is very important, right? So I ask you questions not to find out or point out that you don't know and you are lacking. My intention is to point out that there are many things which you already know and bring that out, right? That is the old uh, classical sense, classical understanding of the term education itself. So by education, we mean uh, bringing something out from what you already have, right? It's something that you already know. We just have to bring it out and put it in perspective. You have to sign something, right? Yeah. So that is the model with which I work, right? So please feel free to give incorrect answers, because even in your efforts to give not very accurate answer that Divya did, even then you are learning something about the topic. Even she is learning how to gather her thoughts, gather her words, and express herself. So I uh, invite you to respond to my questions, even, and I don't expect you to give a very good or accurate or perfect answer, because there is no such thing, right? And it is mostly through kind of dynamics of classroom discussion that learning happens. So what Divya said and how we are going to do it, and the misconceptions with the notion of structuralism and post-structuralism, all these things are going to help others as well, because her response is the response of many other people, right? How many of you know more or less the same thing which Divya said? Just raise your hands. Right? Okay. However, if we look closely at and more deeply into the notion of structuralism, you will discover that it's not a very accurate picture that she has provided, right? Because what we mean by structure is not exactly the same thing as patterns, right? Structuralism is not primarily about.
I will pay fees first.
Yeah. And what about these?
Yeah.
My
Where we that is pending. You continue. Yes.
Okay. So does anyone has something else to add to what Divya has said about structuralism?
So,
Yeah.
so the structure means it could be the ideas by the author.
No. Language analysis. So what do you mean by language analysis, and how is it connected to the question of structure?
We use Sally as pending on these.
Yeah.
So we'll do it later.
I will do it.
Right.
Can someone elaborate upon what do you mean by structure? Signifier and signified. No. That is not structure. Lang and Parole. So what is that, Krishna? Lang and Parole? Can you elaborate? You can unmute yourself if possible.
Sir, Lang means like it talks about language, and parole means it talks about the written text.
Not very close. And how does it connect to structuralism?
So may I try?
Yeah.
Sir, lang may be the rules which
Okay.
are used, and the parole is the specific unit in specific unit. Like if lang is the language, then parole may be the tenses or
Parole
how
maybe. Can you come
maybe
again?
tense, like examples.
Tense.
Yeah. Tense
Okay.
or verb or any means special unit used like this. And lang is the whole component, means whole composition or.
Okay.
Sir,
And how is it connected to structuralism? Structure से क्या related है? Lang Parole का.
Sir, I was trying to say means it's rules of the language, parole.
Okay, but what do you mean by then? Why is it called structuralism? Lang and Parole, how is that connected to structuralism?
So,
Yes.
yeah, I think parole means the meaning which is like if I say a book. So the book isn't the means something related to something a bundle of pages or like, but we are using book since many ages for that particular thing. So it is called book. So I think parole is related to something like that.
No. Going back to the basic question, what do you mean by structure when we use the word structuralism? And you can see that none of you seem to have any idea. There is one question here from there. Can we consider plot as a structure through which we can define a genre? But again, structuralism, would that be about analysis of plot there? Is the plot analysis structuralism? No, right? Then we use word structure in a very, very technical and very different way from the commonplace understanding of word structure, right? We are not looking at structure as in the structure of means pattern or plot. उस अर्थ में हम basically नहीं ले रहे. though it is connected to that, right? It is connected to that, but that is not what it is, right? These can be considered in some way examples of structural analysis, but structural analysis is quite different from that, right? Krishna says lang paroles, Tavan says signifier, signified. All these are ideas. Okay. So now what we are going to do is we are going to discuss at length what it is, right? Structuralism. Structuralism is a development which primarily began in linguistics, right? And the person associated with what we can call a structuralist revolution in linguistics, or some person whom you can call father of modern linguistics, he is a person called Ferdinand de Saussure, who gave a series of lectures, and those lectures were connected and later published, I think posthumously, as a course in general linguistics, and that changed the subject forever, right? So what is this structures revolution is what we need to understand before we can think of what is structuralism, right? Structuralist revolution is almost redefinition of object and method of linguistics. And what do you mean by object and the method of linguistics? What do you understand by these terms? It changed the object and methodology of linguistics. So Saussure forever changed what we study in linguistics and how we study it, right? That's what we mean by object of linguistic study and methodology of study of language, right? He almost changed what we mean by language forever, right? So the real question that we should be asking ourselves is, what do we even mean by the term language? And it's not an easy question to answer, right? For example, right now we are using language for communication in the classroom. But if I ask you, where is this language? Kahan pe hai language? Where will you point out? Can you see language? Can you hear language? What do you mean by language?
Medium of communication.
Medium of communication. So what medium in what sense?
Like we can exchange our thoughts and expressions through it.
Okay, you can exchange your thoughts and emotions using language. Okay. Now, what about thoughts? Are your thoughts made up of language? Can you have a thought without language?
No,
No.
Suppose you did not know any language in the world. Would you be able to think?
No.
No,
No.
sir.
Okay. So what should a linguist study? Should linguists study? So what is the object of linguistics? And that is what was redefined by Ferdinand de Saussure. Before Saussure, in the 19th century and 18th century, people used to study texts, right? And those texts would be historical, means they would, for example, if you are studying Gujarati language, then they would study texts written in Gujarati, right? They would study 17th century Gujarati or Hindi text, and 18th century Gujarati text, and 19th century Gujarati text, and 20th century. So they would be studying text in their historical context. For them, study of language was study of texts in their historical context, and that was called philology, right? Philology was what anybody who was studying language studied, right? So for them, study of 19th century German and 20th century German texts would be study of German language, And those texts can be anything, newspaper reports, they can be short stories, they can be general brochures, books, or whatever. So, but they primarily study texts, and they studied it in their historical context, in historical development. So they would be interested in studying, say, for example, Gujarati of 19th century or 18th century Gujarati. So they would study books or material available in 18th century Gujarati language, right? So their object of study, right? I hope you understand what do you mean by object of study. By the term object of study, you mean आप क्या study कर रहे हो? A botanist would study plants and trees, animal cells. A zoologist will study animal cells, right? So a physicist will study laws of nature and physical manifestation of it. A chemist will look at the chemical aspects of physical matter, right? So what you study is called the object of the discipline, right? So psychologists earlier used to study mind, right, in the 19th century. So the term psychology comes from the word psyche, which means soul in Greek language. Then with the rise of something called behaviorism in 20th century, people started studying behavior. Now, you cannot study mind because mind is not an observable phenomenon, right? And there was an attempt made in humanities to study anything the way natural sciences are studied. Just like a biologist studies life, right? And a physicist studies matter. They use the same methods, right? And the same orientation for studying human behavior and life and social life and cultural life and mind and whatnot. And this was called positivism, right? Positivism means application of natural sciences, the model of natural sciences in human or social sciences. That is called positivism, right? And linguistics, being a subject of humanities, right, use this model. And for them, the object was text in their historical context. Ferdinand Saussure comes in and changes this picture forever. And that is one of the reasons why he is called father of modern linguistics. What he does means you can almost say that he is the first linguist, right? Because the earlier ways of studying language were philological. So earlier students of language were philologists. What he does, he says that there is no need to study language in its historical context. You can study language as a part of same temporal phase, which means if you want to study Gujarati, there is no need to study 11th century Gujarati or 15th century Gujarati. You should be studying Gujarati as it is spoken on streets today, in the newspapers that appear today, right? In the same temporal dimension, in the same temporal phase. I hope you are clear about philology versus linguistics, right? Philology studies texts in their historical context to study language. What Saussure says is that you need not do that. And the example that he gives is from chess. Suppose you want to study how two people are playing chess, then there is no need to study the game right from the first move. I don't know how many of you have played chess. Have you?
No,
Or
sir.
have you seen people play chess?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes,
there is
sir.
a sequence of moves that happen, right? First move followed by second, third, fourth, five, six, etc. So in order to understand chess as a game, right, you need not study how the first move, second move, third move, fourth move happened, but study it right at the moment of study. Right. So suppose the game is now in 38th move. 38 moves have happened, and you want to study the game of chess, then you can start from 30th move. There is no need to study all the 38 moves. Right. By just looking at the game and the board, you can understand the game. That's the example that he gives. And that brings in the fundamental distinction that Saussure is making. Right. The historical way of studying chess would be pehli move study karo, second move, third move, fourth move. Right. And that is the method of philology. Right. And that is also called historical linguistics. You can say that this approach is diachronic approach. That means you look at the history of the language, right? You are looking at language from a historical context, and that is called diachronic approach. Against that, Saussure posits another approach called synchronic. Right. So this is the basic distinction that almost created a new methodology for studying language. Right. All this is happening in the beginning of 20th century, 100 years ago. Right. So synchronic and diachronic distinction is clear for everyone. Any questions, doubts? Those,
can you?
One is asking about versions and variations.
Could not understand
Those
very clearly.
versions. Okay. Versions and variations that Stavan is asking about can also be studied in the same temporal phase. For example, if you are studying Gujarati of 2021, then all the bolis or dialects of Gujarati in 2021 you are going to study. You are not going to study 19th century Gujarati for that, for language variation. Is that clear?
But who decided what is temporal?
Temporal is the moment where you study. The researcher decides.
But for example, if I am one singular person speaking a particular version of Gujarati, nobody else speaks that.
That's not possible.
That can be.
That is never going to be possible, and that is another idea of structuralism, which I will talk about. He is asking, I use one version of Gujarati that nobody uses. Now that's not possible according to Saussure.
Also, as we speak, as we study, language is changing.
Changing, but that change is not what you study, and it does not happen overnight. Right? Language change happens over a period of time, but you are not going to take that period into account. If you want to study 17th century Gujarati, you take it synchronically. Synchronically is the horizontal cross section of language. So suppose the example can be cucumber, kakdi. आप ऊपर से सीधे काटो उसको नीचे लेकर, तो that is called diachronic cut. But if you cut it horizontally, it will be called synchronic cut. Jayesh, is that clear? To understand language, philology put a vertical cut. दूधी लेते हो और ऊपर से काटते हो बीच में से ऐसे सीधे और दो हिस्से हो जाते हैं. That is called diachronic cut. Synchronic cut is in the same time. Synchronic. So game of chess, right? Starting from move number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is called. That study is a vertical cut, a diachronic approach, right? And studying it in the same time. So, uske liye word is synchronic. Syn means same, chronic means time. Dia means across times. Synchronic means in the same time. That's the methodological approach that is fundamental to structuralism, right? So, Jayesh, is it clear now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anyone has a question about synchronic, diachronic as an approach to study of language, as a method? Again, Jaldi is asking about different dialects, but it's different dialects are like different pieces on the same chessboard, right? एक रुक है, एक knight है, एक pawn है, but these are all different parts of the same machine called language.
So, for example, I'm studying Gujarati in 2021, so it would be a synchronic study. But
Yes,
how can we-
contemporary approach, right?
But how can it be useful if I refer to study a language in 2050?
Yeah, then you have to study the language of 2050. Why are you going to? If you are going to study language of 2021 and 2050, that will be a historical linguistic perspective.
So it's like the functionality of structural study only lies in the contemporary time, no.
In the same time.
So nowhere in the future or the past.
But why? How can you do that?
No, I'm just asking that.
Okay.
Because the historical.
Okay, so so the question of dialects, Jaldi, is that clear? Dialects are different speech forms, bolis in the same language. Gujarati, ये काठियावाड़ी बोली है, सुरती बोली है, मध्य गुजरात की बोली है, मेहसाणा की बोली है. All these bolis are in 2021. I hope you get that. So even if you are studying variation, it's called language variation. It's going, your approach is going to be in the same time frame. If you are studying Kathiawadi Boli, you need not study 19th century में काठियावाड़ी बोली क्या थी, आज क्या है वही स्टडी करोगे, right?
So it's a subsection of the language, like dialect is. It's considered synchronic. Okay, got it.
Dialects 19th सदी में भी थी, आज भी है और कल भी रहेगी.
Temporality is given priority over space.
Got it.
Yes, you can in some ways say that. Okay, so this is how you study language. But according to Sashir, what do you mean by language is also very different from philologists. The object itself is different, right? For philologists, language was texts. So if you are studying Gujarati, you would study Gujarati text in 19th century. If you are studying German, then German text of 16th century and so on. So philologists का object जो था वो text था. And the French term for the text is parole. Words. And remember, when we are using language, we can't see the language. What we see or what we experience is the word. Right now you are listening to words, but where is language to this? Language kahan hai? If I ask you, because that is the another fundamental distinction of structuralism between language and words. According to Sashur, these are two different things. Right? In French, it would be called langue and parole. Right? So what is difference between language and words? Because this distinction is invention of Sashur. What do you understand by langue and parole? Which means language and words are two different things. What do you mean by that?
Sir? But
Go ahead.
the words constitute and make a language, particular language. So
Okay.
how can it be different? I mean,
Sashur would argue other way around. It is language that makes sounds into words.
Sir, but then doesn't language transcend the idea of society?
No, it doesn't. But what is language? You first, ये तो पहले बता देना. फिर वो transcend करती है कि नहीं बताएगी.
So I may be wrong here,
Yeah, go ahead.
but again, the whole concept of language is greater than just words. Like Aristotle had said it, like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, sort of thing.
So if I ask you where is language, so where is it? Right now we are using a language called English, right? In our communication. Can you point out where is English?
So first we have to answer the question, what is English language?
Okay,
We are going to come back to the same question.
right. So language is not observable. Would you agree to me? What
It's
you sense or what you
It's
get
an
is
abstract
only
thought.
words. Huh? Exactly.
It's an
Language looks
abstract
like an
idea.
abstraction, right? The idea of language itself looks like an abstraction. What we hear is a set of words. I am speaking words and you are able to understand it.
So can we differentiate language and culture?
We'll come to that. We'll come
so
to that.
you
But right
asked.
now, let us get this distinction clear between Lang and Perron.
So you asked a question in the beginning of the session, that how can we have thoughts devoid of language? And somebody replied with no. But I think me and Stavan, we both agreed that maybe we can have thoughts without language. Maybe, not sure. Would you shed some? What would you say about that?
Hmm?
What
That again goes back to the question, what do you mean by language?
exactly why I thought of this? That you didn't give your opinion about that. That's why.
Yes. My opinion is that you cannot have thoughts without language.
A lot of people who don't know language.
Right? Thoughts are just languaging that we do. Right? You're talking to yourself basically. It's a thoughts. You are the addresser and you are the addressee. What is thinking? You're talking to yourself.
But those thoughts are not independent of anything in the society.
Society पे आते हैं तो बैठ.
Answer वो.
Problem with Stavan is he keeps on jumping the queue instead of addressing the question that is asked.
But like the language, how did like we have?
But I'm asking you, what is language? Yeah, language is a productive force that manifests itself through effects. No.
It is like power.
Force, productive force. If you know Gujarati, you have got productive forces. I don't know Gujarati. What is language?
The production of reality. What I will.
Okay. Sit if you want to sit. Yes. A shared notion of what? Tell me.
Of ideas.
Okay. As an example.
If I say a circle, everybody more or less is going to think about a specific shape.
Okay.
How
does that happen? Word circle is a parole, right? It's not a language.
Yeah.
It's not language. It is parole.
Okay. Yeah.
So you use word circle and people will think of a shape.
Okay. The Earth is round. So that is that long? That I think is that it's
What
fine,
do you
right?
think? What do you think? If you say Earth is round, is it language or paroles?
It's a part of language. Now I'm really confused. It is a sentence which makes it a part of language.
Parole makes a combination of paroles makes a language. Maybe.
Combination of paroles make a language? No.
Okay, that's
because then new combination भी तो हो सकते हैं ना. Very good. If सब paroles को इकट्ठा करो तो language बनता है. तो you can always create new kind of utterances, right? Wrong.
So that brings us again. We can't exemplify lang then in that case. Essay.
It's okay.
It's a self-referential question. We are defining language to language.
That's a good way to run away from the problem. But as somebody who is studying a language, उसको पता तो होना चाहिए क्या study कर रहा है वो. Philologists text को study करते थे, paroles को study करते थे.
Conversation maybe. Utterances, conversations.
Function.
All those are words, right? Because they are, you can sense them through your ears, eyes, and.
Yes.
So the methods of articulation.
Like, is the method means the way you articulate? Is that language?
Sir, because a particular word in different dialects or in different societies are articulated in a different way.
So
So like the meaning of the word also depends upon the articulation. Like,
the way you articulate it.
yes, sir.
So circle को आप circle कहते हो तो उसका meaning change हो जाएगा?
No, sir. But it happens sometimes.
So basic question nobody seems to be answering is what is language?
Sir, I'd like to a tool to express or share or exchange ideas.
But what is that tool? How will you describe that tool? What is it made up of?
A cluster of utterances.
Cluster of utterances.
And a particular.
Let's go back to the example that you set out, right? It's about circle. The word circle is a parole, right? But its meaning, right, is, where does its meaning lie?
Sir, in the particular structure of that sentence, because I cannot speak that something like my name is sir, I cannot speak.
No, what is the meaning of, where will you find the meaning of the word circle?
Sir, in what it
sir, it's already
in what it refers to, says Stavan. Any other ideas, Jayesh?
Sir, it is already said by other people that if we speak a circle, then automatically the round shape or the circle shape will be formed in our minds. So
In your
I think
mind.
yes, so it is what other people have already framed. Other people have already framed, and if we listen a particular word, if I say tree, then a image of tree will be there in our minds immediately.
Right,
Green
very good.
leaves and
So
trunk.
let's continue with this whole example of tree and circle. So when Jaldi says circle, the meaning of the circle comes to your mind, right? Right. You can think of a shape, or when you use the word a tree, then that image of the tree comes to the idea of the tree comes to your mind. Yes. And these two are same things or different things? The word tree and the idea of the tree. Is it same or different?
They're different.
Right. And according to again Sashore, he makes this distinction between signifier and the signified. Signified is the meaning of the tree, word tree, that comes to your mind, or the shape that comes to your mind when I use the word circle. So the circle is the signal, and the shape that comes to your mind is the gets signaled, right? So the terms that are, so he wrote in French, I guess, or Austrian. He was an Austrian or Swiss. Probably he wrote in German or French. I'm not very sure. But signifier is the term used in English to talk about the word circle, right? It's a signal, and what it signals is called signified, right? So signifier, signified, synchronic, diachronic, lang and parole. We are looking at these distinctions because these form the heart of structuralism, right? So let us continue with this whole question: what is language, right? And the question would be, how does it happen that I use word circle?
Justice.
Yeah.
Could you please repeat the distinction between signifier, signified, and signal, because I got a little confused.
Signal is also called signifier. वो एक ही term है.
अच्छा. And those
signified is what gets signaled. और वो हमारे दिमाग में.
So signal and signifier, are these paroles?
Same thing. And the paroles are usually made up of signifiers.
Right. Okay, got it. And signified is
in our mind.
Okay, good. Got it. Thank you. Yes.
Right. Or signified is what gets signaled. Yes. So you see a while you're driving, you see yellow colored on the traffic signal, right? And what does it mean? What will you do? Slow down, right? So slowing down is the idea that comes to your mind. So yellow color is the signifier and slow down is the idea called signified.
But what if it like that example signifies two different things? कुछ लोग भगा देते हैं ताकि
नहीं, वो नियम तोड़ रहे हैं कुछ
नहीं, but still
that पकड़ के चला नहीं पाएंगे.
No, sir, but वो फिर that comes to something that is in traffic rules and that is different. But what we are talking about, like what it signifies.
So my job with Stavan is usually to bring him. He goes off in advance. उसको वापस question पे लाना है. Question is, how does it happen that the word signal, word circle gives rise to the idea in your mind of a shape? How does it happen? किस वजह से होता है ऐसा?
Because of constant process of significance and constantly we are taught and constantly
you are taught. What
Conditioning.
You are conditioning of what?
that this shape is a circle.
Of an idea of the signifier and the signified.
Yes, that these two things are connected. ये आप learn करते हो, right? You are conditioned to respond to one signifier with one signified or more than one signified as well, right? So signified as a response to signifier, what connects signifier to signified is what you learn, right? It's a learned, conditioned thing, right? And it is a rule, as Stavan was saying. Some people break that rule. Yellow kiya aur wo aage nikal gaya, right? So that person is breaking the rule. So there is a rule which says that yellow means go slow. Now you may break that rule if you are like Stavan, right? Or you may not. But then there is this rule that you know, correct? Ha, na.
Yes.
And that rule is called a code in structuralism. Code, C-O-D-E. Code. Code is what connects signifier to signified. Now, can you see this code? Where does it exist? You are driving and you see red color, and that's the signifier. What comes to your mind is signified, right? But where is the code?
In your mind.
In your minds, you have internalized that code. Yes? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So is
Right.
this code making or code formation a part of language learning?
Good. So language is a set of codes. Now you have a definition of language, which you have internalized. So what is a language? Language is a set of codes. Codes are a set of rules, right? Which you have internalized, right? So words and language is very different. Language is a set of codes that you have internalized, while words are texts, written or oral. So red colored signal is the parole. Stop is the meaning, and what connects it is code. So what associates signifier with the signified is called a code. What is the content of the code? Asked Stavan. Content is the rule.
No, sir. Like what I meant is I still did not understand what constitutes as the code. Like there is a
Habit, learning,
but
rule that you have learned. गाड़ी लेफ्ट साइड से चलाओ या आपने स्टडी, इसका कंटेंट क्या है?
that itself is still
What is it?
Sociological.
That's why it's not an object. It's a rule that you have learned.
That
It's not a thing. It's an English. Yeah,
doesn't that bring us to the sociological aspect of language formation?
exactly. And that is something that Saussure underscores, highlights at length. He says that language is a social construct. You cannot have your own language, right? Because codes are shared by people. So language is something that is through and through social. You cannot have, it's not an individual phenomenon, right?
That's why the singular dialect is possible.
It's a social, means it's by group or more than one. It's about collectivity. It's about what connects one person to another. So codes cannot exist which are individuals.
And codes themselves change over time.
Codes change over time. Not just that, code also change from language to language and culture to culture. White colored clothes may signify purity and virginity and joy of a bride in Christianity. White may also signify mourning of a widow. Right? So same signifier can have more than one signifier. And the relation, and this is the great intervention of Saussure, is that it is conventional. It is arbitrary. That's the term he uses. Arbitrariness of sign, by which you mean that relation between signifier and signified is just convention, rudi rivaj, pratha. There is no hard and fast law which says that this, it's not a law of nature that connects the word pen with this object or the idea in your mind. It's not law of nature. It is just convention. A code, parampara, pratishtha और अनुशासन का तो पता नहीं मुझे.
So nothing. This is just.
No, I got that.
Isn't this code imposed almost in a dictatorial way in culture, so that anyone who breaks that code is considered to be mad, which Foucault talks about in Madness and Civilization.
So you are still jumping cues. We are looking at the basics of structuralism. Right, so you have gone into post-structuralism and all that. So a bit better. We will talk about that later. But codes is what constitutes. So what should you be studying as a student of language or a researcher? A biologist studies plants, a botanist studies plants, zoologist studies animal. Then what should a linguist study?
These codes which we were talking about.
So the object of your study is not text per se, not paroles per se. Parole को तो पढ़ना ही पड़ेगा, पर parole is just a means towards the end. Your end of studying language is to derive set of codes or language that a society or a culture or a period uses. Right? So the object has changed and the methodology has changed. Is this much clear? Any doubts, queries, puch lo. Related to whatever we have said. So what distinctions we have discussed? We have discussed diachronic and synchronic methodology. Right? We have studied lang and parole, which is the object of study. We have studied signifier and the signified. We have studied code and arbitrariness of the code or the sign. With me till here, any questions with these ideas?
Sir, will you please explain lang and parole in short once more?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Another question. We'll take them together. Language is a set of, lang ka matlab hai language, right? That's a French word for language. And language consists of set of rules, regulations, conventions, and codes basically. which people have internalized and you cannot see it. Paroles are the specific utterances or uses which you can sense, you can see. You can see green colored light, right? But the meaning of the word green, kya hai? What is the meaning of the word green? Or that green signal is what? Go ahead, right? Now you cannot see go ahead. It's there in your mind. It is signified. And there is no law of nature which says that yellow should be means go slow. It is just a convention or a code. And language consists of codes, conventions, which can also be called grammar, right? So grammar is something that you have internalized, acquired. It is never, it's not often learned, it is acquired. Right? You did not know when you learned the meaning of the signal green, but you have acquired the grammar of traffic signals. So can I use the word grammar of traffic signal now? Do you understand what I say when I say grammar of traffic signals? Or is it a difficult idea to understand? So lang is the grammar, right? And parole is the individual utterance. Specific utterance that you can sense. It is made up of signifiers. And language is made up of codes. Signifier and signified together is called a sign. S-I-G-N, sign. So a sign, according to Saussure, is made up of signifier and signified. And the relation between signifier and signified is arbitrary, random. By arbitrary, you mean uske piche koi कानून नहीं बना. There is no law underlying it. There is no such thing like law, right? It's just a convention, which means convention can change tomorrow, right? If people agree to the change of conventions, it changes. So the codes are something like contracts or agreements between people. So you can invent, that is how you invent new codes. If I say 2, then you have to bring coffee, right? ऐसे code बना दिया मैंने.
So
Yeah.
doesn't
There is
it,
no relation between 2 and coffee. ऐसा कोई लेना देना है नहीं. Yeah.
doesn't it raise a question on the fragility of language? Because we can collectively just agree to something
Yes.
bizarre and
I won't use word fragility. What I would say that it is fluid, right? That the signified may change.
So there are no essential meanings of.
Pardon?
There are no essential meanings of the signifier. And
Exactly. So words do not have any essential meanings. Meaning of the word is what people decide it to be. People who use those words decide that this should be the meaning, then that is the meaning of the word. So it is not fixed. Right? So I won't use the word fragility. I would use the word dynamic and fluid to indicate this changeability or having multiple signifieds as well. But are these terms clear? Diachronic, synchronic, lang, parole,
Yes, sir.
signifier, signified, sign, code, and arbitrariness of the sign. Clear? No doubt, right? Yeah, Sten.
So could you please come again with the signal, signifier, and signified, because it's
Right. Signifier is signal. Green color is signifier. And the meaning of the signifier in your head is you can go ahead. right? So go ahead in your mind is called signified. And it is not to be confused with something called referent. Referent is when the sign refers to the objects, like pen. There is something called idea of the pen in your mind, and this is the object that it refers to. Now, even if it is not there, I can talk about pen, right? Yes or no? So referent is the object in the world. Now, very often language does not talk about objects in the world. For example, red color stop does not mean any object in the world, right? I hope you are clear. I think it's slightly difficult to understand because very often we think that language is made up of words to refer to things. Language is using words to refer to the ideas rather than things, which might remind people of somebody called Plato.
Yes, I was going to say.
But then it means that you need not have reference. I can talk of unicorn and there may be no unicorn, right? I can talk of dog without dog being around, right?
So the difference between referent and signifier is the idea of being concrete and abstract.
No, it is more of function of the language. It is called referential function of language, according to linguists like Roman Jakobson, whom we'll be talking about as the course. You are using language to refer to the objects, but you may use language to refer about objects which are not present. If I use the word God, you ask me when is the exam, I said God knows. Then you know what I'm talking about. Though you have not seen God, neither have I. Yeah. Because the idea of God is communicable. It is social. The object is not there. So when you're using language to refer to specific object, it is called referential use of language. So sign is made up of signifier and signified. Stan, is that clear?
Yes, I think.
Now, word and meaning को signifier और signified कह सकते हो, but signifier and signified is a larger domain of cultural communication, according to Ferdinand de Saussure, and he uses word semiology to talk about larger or non-linguistic communication, right, which happens all the time. Like the signal, traffic signal is a good example of non-verbal communication.
But is there any non-linguistic communication, like any communication without codes?
There is.
Is a thought a non-coded?
Now that is part of something called, he's asking, can there be something communication without codes? That's what Stavan is asking. And that falls under a subject called semiotics, which is larger study of sign, including natural signs. Natural signs are let me use a terrifying analogy, right? That Omicron virus enters your body and your body triggers a response to it, right? So that the protein on the virus acts as a sign for the body to respond with the counter, right? So there is a communication happening without language and code, right? So that falls under a larger subject called semiotics. Semiology, according to Saussure, is study of cultural codes and conventions, like fashion, like food, like wrestling, like whatnot. And one important structuralist thinker called Roland Barthes, Barthes, right, has written on book called Mythologies, where he writes structural analysis of wrestling or advertisement detergent advertisements. and beauty contests and all that. So you are looking at the grammar of fashion. What do you mean by that?
What they signify.
What is the meaning of the phrase grammar of fashion?
What fashion
Hmm?
means to people.
What are the
makes
codes?
it?
What they
Yeah,
define.
what rules?
Hmm.
Functionality of fashion.
Right. Okay. So I am going to throw in some more ideas. Ready? For 5-10 minutes. We have seen Lang and Parole, distinction, signifier, signified distinction of semiology, as he calls it. We have seen diachronic, synchronic. We have seen arbitrariness of science. Right? One more revolution. All these are revolutionary ideas because they have changed the way we think about language, and that's why most of the theory of cultural studies and something called post-structuralism, all this relies on Saussure, substantially on Saussure's idea. This is the basis of literary theory of 20th century, right? Later, so they are so fundamental. We cannot think of language meaning in the same way as they used to before Saussure. That's why I call it revolutionary. Right? He uses the word difference. He says that any element in language, right, is able to function because of differences. And what do you mean by that? Any element of language, like say for example, a system of phonemes. Phonemes are the units of pronunciation, right? The sound units. Pa, fa, ba, ba, ta, da, ka, ga. These are phonemes. They become meaningful because of differences rather than similarities. So on one hand, meaning is product of arbitrariness. It is also produced by differences, right? And he talks about language and he says, for example, pa, ba, both are labial. दोनों हम जीभ से बोलते हैं, right? Pa, what is difference between pa and ba? So both of them have a common place of articulation, lips, pa, ba, labial. Sa, z, which uses palate, अंदर का palate, sa, z, labiodental, sa, z, s, z. So all these are phonemes which are structured in a binaristic way. That means per meaning or the work that the sound phoneme per does is because of its difference from b, because it's different from b. S is different from z, s, z, t, d, k, and at various points. Even if the point of articulation is the same, they are different because one is aspirated, that is saas aati hai. Right. So the meaning, according to Saussure, operates because of differences and arbitrariness. That means what is the meaning of color red can be understood in the context of three-colored system of traffic signals. आप घर में जाते हो और येलो लाइट देखते हो तो आप चलना स्लो तो नहीं कर देते ना. You get what I'm saying? The meaning of that yellow color is to be understood in the context of three-colored system of traffic. It does not have meaning of its own. I don't know if I'm clear. Yellow color does not have any meaning, right? It is one, arbitrary, and secondly, it gains from the differences from green and red in the system. Am I making some sense? No, we are talking of logic here. So we'll come to that later. Yeah. I'm just
talked about
the traffic signal में 3 colors होते हैं, red, green और yellow, right? And yellow means go slow, right? All of you know that. Now, but if you see yellow color in isolation in somebody's home, it does not mean that you should go slow. Am I making sense now? So the meaning of word yellow in traffic signal is gained by one arbitrariness of sign and its place in the system. Its place in the system. Three-colored system hai. And it is defined by differences from its green and red.
Sir?
Yeah, go ahead, Jayesh.
Sir, you mentioned about two terms here, arbitrariness and differences. So arbitrariness is something which is not too sure and too particular about. Like if we say a particular term or particular.
I can't hear you properly. There is some issues with your sound, Jayesh. What I can hear is that you are asking about arbitrariness, right?
Sir, here you mentioned two terms, arbitrariness and differences. So arbitrariness is a thing that if I say a particular word, then it's not related to that particular word, but it goes beyond that, and it can be many other things which can be related to.
Yeah, pratha rivaj, right? Word
Differences.
differences is.
So, sir, I am a bit confused that then what is the difference between difference and arbitrariness? Because difference is also the same thing, that there is a particular difference between two particular terms, or how is the difference different from arbitrariness?
Arbitrariness means कोई नीति नियम नहीं है, प्राकृतिक नियम नहीं है कोई भी जो कहता है कि येलो कलर का मतलब धीमे चलाओ गाड़ी. ऐसा कोई नियम भगवान ने बनाया. There is no natural law underlying association of yellow with go slow. That is what arbitrariness means. What does difference mean? Difference means that the word or the light, yellow light, means what it means because of its place in the signal system, which is made of three colors. Right? So this yellow color means go slow because red color means stop and green means go ahead. It exists in difference between the three things. It inherently does not have any value.
The arbitrariness is removed by the like the difference that is in the context. For example, like red color is there and it's arbitrary, but when it's in the system of a traffic signal, then the arbitrariness is removed and the context is provided, the code, as we say.
Right.
So the difference.
It does. What he's saying that arbitrariness is removed, but I won't say removed. It gets a context.
Yes, it's
right. It gets a context, and the context is the system. और system को ही language कहते हैं. Right. So language is a system made of, and consider traffic signal as a language having three words. तीन शब्दों की भाषा है. रेड, येलो, ग्रीन. और हर एक शब्द का अर्थ उससे डिफरेंस में है, not in its inherent properties. Meaning of the word green as go ahead does not lie in the color green, but in its place in the system. Right? And the place is that of difference. It is different from other two colors. Which means words themselves do not have any other, don't carry inherent meanings. The meanings are produced by conventions, codes, and their place within the system. Right?
Difference.
Can you come again? Again, there is some problem with your voice.
The difference that we are talking about here.
I can't hear you properly. Jayesh. Can you type? Anyone else has an issue with what we have said? Any doubts, queries?
Then, sir, to understand, we have to understand the difference first. If we want to understand the concept, then we have to understand the difference between the two concepts. Then only
Two
we
or
can
more.
perceive the meaning.
Right. So any meaning is understood in the system of differences. It does not have any positive value. Now Jayesh is asking, is this the same that Derrida proposed? Actually, Derrida is repeating what Saussure is said. ये डेरिडा का आइडिया नहीं है, ये आइडिया सशोर का है जो डेरिडा लेता है. डेरिडा बाद में आता है. डेरिडा चड्डी पहन के घूमता था तब सशोर मर गया था. Right? So he is using Derrida is using basics of structuralism here, right? And what Derrida does is something else. He combines the word difference with defer, that is to postpone, and he coins a new word or neologism called difference.
But the basic difference would be there is a signified in structuralism, but there is a chain of signification which Derrida says there is no stoppage. There is a continuous chain of signification. There is nothing getting significant.
Right, there is the ultimate meaning is never reached. That's what he uses the word transcendental signified, which does not exist, which means that the ultimate meaning of
there is no end.
There is no ultimate meaning, right? It's always open to.
So, and you were talking about this is doubt that you were talking about reference. That you said this pen is the reference, but the idea, the signified, will stay in my mind. But for signified to come in my mind, there needs to be an existence of a reference first.
May not. For example, God. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Right now, you have not seen God.
No, but
I'm sure.
I'm not talking about the material existence. I'm talking about the conceptual existence.
Conceptual existence is signified. Concept को signified ऐसा word कह सकते हैं. Idea के लिए भी signified कह सकते हैं.
So the reference comes.
Reference is the.
It's subsumed under the.
No, it is used to talk about the world. For example, there may not be. For example, right now there is no dog in the room, right? But I can still talk about dog.
But I know what the concept of dog because I know.
So concept पता है. Reference में क्या है? Close the door. The door है तो मैं बंद करने के लिए कह रहा हूँ. So that is the referential use of language. You are using language to refer to certain things. Yes, so Jayesh, is that clear? We'll talk about Derrida later, but the basis of post-structuralism lies in structuralism, the way postmodernism is related to modernism and post-graduation is related to graduation. Right? It may mean several things. It may mean that one phase of your study is over and a new phase has started. Or it may mean that you are doing the same thing in an amplified way. Or you are going more intense or deeper into the same thing that you have started. Or it may chronologically mean something. उसके बाद. Right? Post-independence का मतलब ये नहीं कि independence खत्म हो गया. जो होने को जा रहा है पर अभी कह नहीं सकते हो गया ऐसे कह नहीं सकते, right? But so post does not mean structuralism is finished. नहीं, वो कुछ it's not an adjective. बहुत ज्यादा arbitrariness Stavan ले गया था. Stavan uses free association, stream of consciousness. Meta model. Okay. Any other question? Aristotelian A is not B. Yes. Hegel and Aristotle ये सब पीछे तो आते ही हैं. Binarisms in language.
Differences by the self and the other.
Differences means there is no positive element in language. You can recognize a particular element of a language, it may be a word or a sound or it may be meaning, by its relation to other words, sounds and meaning, right? That is what it means. And that is what, according to him, is the difference between value and signification. Signification or significance is the meaning of something. Like yellow means go slow, is the significance of the color yellow in a traffic signaling system. The value is that it comes after red and before green. No, after green or before red. ऐसे उसकी जगह सिस्टम के अंदर उसकी जगह, that is, it has something to do with value. Significance is its meaning. They are connected, but they are not the same, according to Saussure. So word cow, right, has a particular value in the system, but its meaning is that it's an animal. But the value of the idea of cow varies from culture to culture, right? In India, people may think of cow as a sacred animal, but for Americans, it is the breakfast, right? But दोनों significance एक ही है, मगर value उसकी अलग है.
इंडिया में पहले वो sacred breakfast था.
Sacred. Okay. Yeah. Any questions before we stop for today? Clear? If you are awake, I will expect that it's clear. Yeah.
So what is structure in structuralism?
Very good. So coming back to the basic question, structure is the grammar of, that is the set of codes of a particular thing. So structure of fashion does not mean आपके color कैसे cut हुए हैं. It means what is the meaning of those cuts, right? It has something to do with the grammar of fashion or food or whatever. So a structure is set of codes, rules and regulations, rather than pattern, as you said. It's not about pattern. Pattern is a manifestation of structure.
So the emphasis is on like what a particular use of language signifies.
Language को structure कहते हैं. Structure is equal to language in structuralism. Lang, as against parole. And patterns की बात हम कल करेंगे कि उसके पैटर्न के नियम पढ़ते हो तो आप स्ट्रक्चर पढ़ रहे हो कि पैटर्न किस किस्म किया जाता है. And people like Saussure and Jacobson would argue that at basic level, all languages, whether it is fashion, food, traffic signal, English, Gujarati, Tamil, have a same structure. Right? That sounds too much, right? And in fact, psychoanalyst called Jacques Lacan would say that unconscious is structured like language. What does he mean by that? But he means that unconscious also follows the same rules as what our language follows.
But sir, does unconscious have rules?
That's what he says. There are rules which govern unconscious. So when structuralism went to psychoanalysis, especially it was taken up by psychoanalysts like Jacques Lacan, it became structuralist psychoanalysis. When it is taken up by Roland Barthes to analyze fashion, right? Some people use it to analyze cinema. Some people use structuralism to study mythological and kinship systems like Claude Lévi-Strauss. So he uses structuralism in analysis of myths and kinship. Kinship यानी काका मामा कैसे होता है? Right. So Lévi-Strauss is a structuralist anthropologist. Lacan is structuralist, psychoanalyst, and Althusser is structuralist, Marxist. So structuralism was then taken over by other intellectuals for other purposes. But these are the basics जो अभी हमने discuss किया. Anything? Okay, so what we are going to do from next classes is that we will have presentations on these essays, and